I have an obsession that I want to confess to you. I am deeply, strangely fascinated with the ways that people communicate without language. I know it's kind of funny for someone who likes to write, but spot on for a musician. Throughout my life, some of my most profound relationships have not even included conversation. One example of this, of a soul connection without words, has to be my grandfather. Me and my grandfather, we used to spend hours laughing together. All he had to do was give me one look and I'd crack up. It would start with a chuckle and then escalate to a full-on roar, and sometimes we would get to that can't breathe, milk in your nose, full-on cackle. Whether we were at my auntie's house in Seattle or back in his Addis Ababa living room, it was our MO. See, we didn't speak the same language because in my childhood, my family moved to the States from Ethiopia. And after I entered the American school system, I never regained the Amharic fluency I once had. And my grandfather never learned English. He didn't need to. He was an elder by the time he got to the U.S. And that made the laughter extra precious. All I had to do was glance over his way and he'd smile at me, and we were somehow of one mind, even though there were so few words between us. Laughing together, that was how we would say, I see you and I love you. Today's show is about just that. I'm talking with tap dancer Gerson Lanza, a man who, without saying a word, can tell whole histories with his feet. My name is Meklit, and this is Movement, Music and Migration Remixed. And in case it wasn't clear, this is the start of a brand new season, y'all. This season, I'm going to help you discover music that doesn't shy away from the large-scale forces at work in all of our lives and in the music we are surrounded by every single day. We want to make you hear the world just a little bit differently. Your head, your heart, and your hips will thank you.
So when I first got here in 2001, I didn't speak nothing, nothing.
Gerson Lanza moved from Honduras to the Bronx when he was 11 years old. He and his two brothers shared a single bright orange suitcase filled with only summer clothes. That was it.
I'm culture shock. I don't know where I'm at. I don't know why the cat sleeping on the bread in the deli. I don't know nothing.
Today, Gerson is an acclaimed Afro-Latino tap dancer who has performed everywhere, from the Cotton Club in Harlem to the Kennedy Center in D.C. He's also a scholar, someone trying to change the way people think about tap dancing, refocus us on how it too began from an experience of migration, a forced migration of people who made culture, despite a centuries-long, brutal attempt to take everything away. But when he moved to New York, Gerson didn't know any of that. He was just an 11-year-old kid trying to find his way in a new place, and his mom was worried about him.
My mom noticed that I wasn't learning English fast enough for her liking because I was with my Puerto Rican friends, Dominican friends,
Right.
Guatemalan, Honduran friends, like talking Spanish all the time. The only time we really were talking English was in class. And even then, all our teachers were bilingual in CS 211 near East Tremont in the Bronx.
Right.
And so my mother was like, you know what? We're going to move to Harlem, which is obviously a very predominantly black neighborhood. It's a very Latino thing to do. It's just like, we're going to throw you in the middle of the ocean and you're going to have to swim. That's how I got into performing arts high school.
Can you describe what it was like? Like, what was it like to walk into your performing arts school before you spoke English? Like, what were the first moments
Oh, man.
like?
I walked into Miss Evelyn class, social studies,
Hey.
and she asked me, "What's your name?" And my response was like, "My name is Gerson," but now with this confidence of now. It was very much like a shy, "Hi, my name is Gerson." She just said, "Go sit down over there," which was in the back of the classroom. And I didn't speak for like an entire week because I felt so small. Mind you, this is my first time that I'm in a full English speaking middle school where I don't know nobody in Harlem. And my welcoming was, "Go sit down in the back." And that was it.
So what were your survival tactics? Like,
Oh,
what did
man.
you do to survive?
Believe it or not, when they do the end of the year show, the tap dance group was always last. And nobody would leave, no matter how terrible the other numbers were, nobody would leave until they see the tap dance group. So then I saw that and I was like, yeah, I want to be part of this thing.
Yes. And there's a reason Gerson wanted to be part of tap dancing. It had actually been part of Gerson's world for years, before he came to Harlem and before he even came to the U.S. Almost from the time he was born. Almost. When you were a kid growing up in Honduras, what did you know about tap dancing?
Absolutely nothing.
Really?
Tap dance was never in the picture.
Gerson's tap dance journey really begins in Honduras, watching TV.
I used to go to kindergarten and we'll come back home and we would sit down in the couch before doing my homework and we turn on the TV. It was a ritual that my dad and I always did. At the time, it was one of those big monster TVs that looked like furniture.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and my mom had sent that TV from the U.S. because she was already living in the United States. Nonetheless, my dad and I sat down in front of that TV and turned on Sesame Street. And in one of these episodes, I first encountered tap dance through Gregory Hines and Maurice Hines.
Today, my brother and I are going to be talking about near and far.
And I saw their feet move so fast, and I'm like, how can they make all of these sounds and their body is not moving as fast as their sounds are hitting my ear? What's happening?
Like a superpower.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was. It was a superpower. So I was like, wow, they're making music with their bodies, with their feet.
I don't know what you're doing.
Listening to Gerson, I started thinking about the first times I saw hip-hop on the streets of Brooklyn. And that was also like a superpower. A group of people in a circle would beatbox, and the mouth and lips and tongue would become a drum. Even though hip-hop was barely allowed on mainstream radio at the time, it was bursting from the seams of culture, bringing people together, proliferating, and refusing to be silenced. I couldn't help but make the connection. That day, in front of the TV, Gerson was connecting with an art form that would ultimately allow him to express himself, be himself, claim space for himself. And the roots of the art form, like hip-hop, felt like they were made for someone just like him. Can you talk a little bit about the history of tap and specifically its history as a Black art form?
Sure. And I think you hit it on the nail right away by saying that tap dance is an African-American art form. Some folks do not know that, and it's really important to put that up front. Tap dancing, it started from way back when enslaved Africans came into the United States. There is laws that were put into place that remove the use of drums.
Yes,
We
that's
think
right.
about the Stono Rebellion or Stono Revolution that happened in South Carolina, where these drums were taken away because drums and trumpets were viewed as a form to ignite revolutions.
They understood the power,
They understood the power, exactly. And because they understood the power and they thought that this was the way to eradicate such power,
right.
They decided to create rules to remove the use of these instruments. So what happens when you take away the instruments? You only have but your bare self, your body, to be able to emulate the sounds of the instruments you play. So then the body becomes that form of expression.
Yes. Like to me, it makes me think of the way that like take away the drum, but the knowledge, the traditions,
Remains.
They don't go exactly, they remain. You can try to erase, but the traditions live in people. They live in people in such a way that it is impossible. It is impossible to erase. It reminds me of that sentence, like, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. Have you ever heard that?
I've never heard of it, but I love it.
Gerson didn't know it at the time, but from his living room in Honduras, he was receiving the fruit of that long ago seed. A seed that flowered in the Harlem Renaissance and has grown there ever since.
The second encounter with tap dance was, are you familiar with the Apollo Theater in Harlem?
Am I familiar with it? Actually, I've played there, but
there
only the little stage, only the little one.
Nah, I'm not surprised. Well, then you are also familiar with Amateur Night at the Apollo, which happens every Wednesday.
Yes.
And they've been doing this for decades and decades. Well, again, reruns in Honduras.
It's time for Amateur Night with Mark Curry. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Apollo Amateur Night. I'm your host, Mark Curry, and we're going to kick in the rules. If we like the act, you can... It's up to you. If you don't like them, you can...
I was again in my living room with my dad, and Amateur Night at the Apollo is famous for booing people off stage.
Yes, it is. It's high pressure.
It's high pressure. You either bring it correct or you're going to get booed off stage very, very quickly. Well, what happens when you get booed off stage? The Sandman comes out. And the Sandman has always been a tap dancer.
Oh, yes.
And I remember he jumped off the balcony onto the stage and started doing these amazing rhythms as he's like moving the unwanted talent from stage. And the crowd goes crazy while he's on stage doing his thing, right?
All right, coming up next.
That was the second time I encountered tap dancing. And again, it was like this glorious moment. Of course, not for the performer on stage, but for me. Watching from the distance, from Honduras to be exact, this was one of the most entertaining things that I've ever seen.
How old are you in this moment?
At this time, I was probably 9 years old, 9 or 8. Mm-hmm. Now, I got to tell you about the third time I actually saw tap dancing.
In person.
In person. I'm now 11. And I'm in the United States, and I'm going to Watley Secondary School for the Performing and Visual Arts in New York City.
Again, he sees the tap dancers perform. It's glorious. It's the highlight of the show. For a new kid in school with no friends and barely any English, it's the thing to do, and Gerson wants in. But then there's a little coincidence that absolutely seals the deal.
Well, it happens that when I walked into the dance class, the person that walked in to teach that class is the very same Sandman from the Apollo that I watched from my living room in Honduras. It brought a sense of calmness because I was familiar with the Sandman. I was familiar with the environment that he was in.
And it was a thread. It was like a thread of continuity that you could hold.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm also thinking of the way that when you have a migration experience and you don't know the language, suddenly you're also given and you yourself are putting energy into cultivating a skill where you can communicate your very essence and being even without words.
Totally. I really found refuge in tap dancing, like literally. Like, you know how often people say, yo, yeah, art is a form of communication. To me, that was it. I couldn't speak English, right? Like there was no preparation for my coming to the United States, not for me or my brothers. And so for me, truly, tap dancing was the form, because you could communicate so much through tap dancing. You can hit hard, you can hit soft, you can find different tonalities in your tap shoes. There's a lot that can be said with tap dancing.
Yes.
And for me, it was truly that.
When Gerson was a kid and he put on his tap shoes, he was trying to fit in, be one of the cool kids, but also answer a call to dance that had hooked him way back in Honduras on that television screen. Now, he's been tap dancing for over 2 decades, and what he wants to communicate has changed. Now, when he travels from place to place, he leads people to reject the whitewashing of tap and to understand that its roots are intricately entwined, inseparable, in fact, from the history of Black people in America.
You've said before that like a lot of people today don't know the history of tap dancing, or they're just associating it with like Gene Kelly and Singing in the Rain.
Yes.
What do you want people to think about when they hear the words tap dance?
When that word comes to the ears, I also want them to associate that word with Black excellence, an American art form, born out of enslaved Africans. I want them to think about that it's not just the dance, but it's also music. I want them to think all of those things.
You can catch Gerson on stage this year with the tap company Music from the Soul, which was listed by the New York Times as one of the best dance performances of 2022. Gerson is also wrapping up his MFA in dance from the University of Maryland and recently defended his thesis. Not bad for a kid who walked into school barely confident enough to speak his name. My grandfather is an ancestor now. I keep a photo of him on my bookshelf, and I still look at it on most days. In the picture, he's at the Skagit Valley Tulip Festival just outside Seattle. He's wearing a suit and a white button-down shirt with brown and tan stripes and leather dress shoes. Behind him is a field of pink tulips as far as the eye can see, and a little patch of rare blue sky with passing clouds. He's got this smile on his face, and when I close my eyes, I still think of him as just about to laugh. Our own little language bursting from the photo. I try to listen to that photo in the same way that I listen to Gerson dance. Gerson's feet, they speak to me. Gerson taught me that you don't just watch dance, you hear it. Dancers are percussionists. Dancers are musicians. Think about the flamenco dancer whose feet are as rapid fire as a soloing drum kit, or the zapateado of son jarocho channeling Afro Mexico via high heels on wooden boxes. or the Bharatanatyam from India, where bangles on ankles stack complex rhythms with each footfall. Each sound speaking more than words, each sound part of the dance. One inseparable whole. This season, you will find new sounds to fall in love with from artists whose life stories and songs bloom from migration. You'll hear from Daime Arosena, one of my all-time favorite vocalists, about an unexpected move that transformed her sound.
It was important for me because I got the opportunity to reinvent myself.
You'll hear from Sid Sriram about his winding journey from the Indian film industry to a stage at Coachella.
Closing that second weekend with that prayer, the whole audience just went silent.
And you'll hear from the Puerto Rican pop duo Buscabulla, who tell me what it's like for independent artists on the island in the wake of Bad Bunny's massive success.
There was an energy in the island that I cannot describe.
And so much more. Movement is produced by Ian Koss and myself, Meklit Hadero. Our editor is Megan Tan. Our co-creator and podcast godmother is Julie Kane. Our broadcast partner is The World. We are supported by the Mellon Foundation and distributed by PRX. If you enjoyed this story, consider sending it to a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Believe me, this stuff really does help people find the show. And if you happen to be curious about my albums or performances, you can learn more at meklitmusic.com. That's MEKLIT music.com. Movement will be back with new episodes every Tuesday through the summer and fall.